Welcome back to Red Cedar Radar. I am back with as promised, my preview episode for Michigan State versus Michigan this weekend. I am joined by a member of our Spartans Illustrated team, Chase Glasser. He's been on the pod once before, I think, to talk about football, and he's back again to give kind of more insight into Michigan, how their season has gone so far, and break down their team on offense and defense. Thank you so much for joining, Chase. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
For those that don't know, give a little bit of a background on your relationship to Michigan football and Spartans Illustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did go to the University of Michigan. I graduated from there in 2021, and just a football enthusiast. I covered the team in some sort of a capacity for the student TV program when I was at Michigan, and then saw the opportunity at the Only Colors, which has since become Spartans Illustrated, to do scheme writing, X's and O's. So that's what I do for SI, covering kind of a scheme breakdown, a weekly scheme breakdown, scheme standouts, kind of looking at the games and opponents from a specifically schematic perspective. And it's always nice when the two get to intersect like they do this week.
Absolutely. Will you have an article coming out before the Michigan State game, or will you do more like post game analysis?
Both. I will
Okay.
have an article looking forward to the game up, I think, October 19th. And then we
Okay.
will have an article coming out about the game and breaking it down somewhere midweek after the game.
Okay. So I will have your pregame article linked down in the description of this episode if you want to check out his work at Spartans Illustrated. I think we can just jump right in. Let's start with offense. Give a little, maybe some names to watch on Michigan's offense, and then I have a specific question for you, but just a rundown of, some players to watch for Michigan State fans who haven't watched Michigan play already this season.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, most of the names are going to be names that you're familiar with from last year. Most of the names are going to be widely familiar. JJ McCarthy's the quarterback, is a third year player, second year starter, largely efficient, doesn't turn the ball over much, despite what you may have seen in the TCU game. Somewhat surprisingly, that was only his, I believe, third and fourth interceptions of the season. Um, Not necessarily a volume quarterback, efficient. The structure of the offense doesn't usually rely on him to make a high volume of throws, and that's because of the backfield. Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards are two very good running backs, less explosive than last year, efficient but not as explosive as last year. They play behind a good offensive line. The Joe Moore Award winner 2 years in a row that returns 3 out of 5 starters. Good offensive line, I think possibly a bit overrated. But the interior of that line, specifically both guards, they are among the best at their positions in the country, if not the best. And you can see it in the way that they structure their offense. Michigan runs what I would call an NFL level of run scheme as far as the complexity and the variance of what they're able to throw out there. A mix of both gap and zone stuff. It's really, it puts your linebackers in positions of conflict is kind of the entire idea, and the offensive line is good enough to deliver the running backs into the second and third levels of the defense with pretty sufficient regularity. They run a lot of quick hitting stuff to the perimeter, a lot of counters, pin and pull, down G, and then they'll also hit you with a crack sweep. They'll hit you with inside and outside zone duo. They can stress every part of a defensive run front. Um, and that's just in the run game. Their passing concepts, I'd say, are probably a little bit less developed. They have three tight ends, all of whom are excellent blockers. Um, Max Bredesen and Colston Loveland, as well as AJ Barner, all of them are very active in the run game as far as blocking. And then Colston Loveland's one of the better receivers on the team. At wide receivers, it's not an overly deep group. Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson are the two names to watch. They use a lot of kind of deep concept routes where maybe Wilson goes deep, and then you have Cornelius Johnson running a dig underneath. It's a concept called dagger. Puts the safeties in a position of conflict. They use that quite a bit, and then they have a lot of intermediate concepts with the tight ends underneath to keep the chains moving. They also use Donovan Edwards in the passing game quite a bit, getting him matched up on linebackers.
It seems like they're a well oiled machine from the couple games that I've watched and based off what you've said. Do you think that Michigan State has anything that they can do on defense that will really give Michigan any trouble with their offense?
So I think you have to define success, but I think if Michigan State is able to match their performance from last year against Michigan, we should be very happy from that perspective. Last year, I think Michigan scored on 7 of 9 drives, but the vast majority of those were field goals. I think they kicked 5 field goals to 2 touchdowns. And the final score wound up 29-7. If a couple fourth downs had gone differently and Michigan State had converted, you may be talking about a game that's substantially more competitive. If the defense is able to, Michigan's going to move the ball. If the defense can force field goals and bow up in the red zone, then that could be something that I think would be qualified as a success. The issue with that is last year Michigan was a bottom half team in the country as far as converting red zone opportunities to touchdown. That is not the case this year. The guy who handled the red zone play calling is no longer with the team, and they've been much more efficient and just deployed a lot more concepts. Something that they did against Minnesota that I didn't like was show a proclivity for low red zone quarterback runs. I think that those are much more effective when you're working between the 20s. If they do that again, as they did last year against Michigan State, I think you're probably going to see another field goal fest. And if that happens, then Michigan State has the opportunity to stay in the game and stay within contact.
I think that's a good point when talking about the measurement of success for this game. Um, I think little wins are maybe what's most important here, and growth from maybe what we saw on their last game on the road against Rutgers. I'm not expecting that Michigan State is going to be able to put it together to win. That's just how I'm feeling right now. But I think those little things are important as they move on for the rest of the season because there are some maybe winnable, important games um, against some other teams coming forward. And I think momentum is what's most important for me.
Certainly. Progress is the aggregation of marginal gains, right? So, especially in a season like this, in a
Right.
context in a situation with what Michigan State's sitting in, you look for positives wherever you can find them, and I would be surprised if there's none coming out of this because you still look for opponent invariant things that may translate to a different level of competition.
Absolutely. Anything else about the offense that you want to add before we switch to defense?
That's about it. Again, they haven't been hitting explosives with the regularity that they were last year, but the offense has still remained extremely efficient. So, in some ways, that's almost more difficult for defenses to go against a team that's completely comfortable putting together a 13 play, 6 minute drive and just doing that over and over and over again. From a Michigan State perspective, I was alarmed, and I think they gave up over 100 yards to Kyle Monangai in the fourth quarter alone. Um, at some point, that's a pride and morale issue, and I think the team has fought sufficiently hard given the situation that they've been in. But you don't want to see that spiral, especially with a new quarterback um, against what will be a very salty Michigan defense.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's switch to defense. Some names to watch and how you think Michigan's defense will match up against Michigan State's offense.
hmm It's not a huge secret that Michigan hasn't really played anybody, and what that has allowed is an incredible level of rotation. They've played 12 different people on the defensive line alone. They have they have 2 of the top 5 best defensive tackles in the country per PFF, and another guy who's a top 50 tackle. So their defensive interior is extremely good. They have a pair of top 100 recruits on the edges. So if they go in a 5-man front, you'd have Derek Moore, a sophomore on one end. Then you would have in the middle Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, and Kenneth Grant, who are among the best defensive tackles in the country. And then Braden McGregor on the other defensive end. They normally run like a 4-2-5 or a 5-2. Linebacker is going to be Mike Barrett, who I think was PFF's highest graded player of the week. A little undersized, but a very good blitzer and a technically correct player. And then Junior Colson, who's not technically perfect, but is extremely athletic. And then in the back end, they return both safeties, Makari Page and Rod Moore, who are extremely good, very veteran, and Will Johnson, who is one of the highest rated corners in his class. Second corner is a little bit of a concern. Josh Wallace is a UMass transfer. He can get burned on double moves. Mike Sainer still plays in the slot, athletically limited, but extremely technically proficient. They are an NFL defense in every sense of the word except for talent. And their talent's fine, but they have Jesse Minter, who follows in the Mike McDonald mold of coordinators who've come over from the Ravens. They run a staggering variety of coverages. They switch coverages post snap. They disguise things. They are comfortable running a variety of different fronts. It's an extremely veteran and well-oiled group. It's been kind of galling actually to watch them give up yards to teams like Minnesota and Nebraska at times because they're practicing their Ohio State specific defense in live action against large swaths of their schedule. I don't know if I've ever seen that happen before. And then they just will stomp on you in the red zone. I don't think they've faced a goal to go situation on defense yet this year, and part of that is very much opponent specific. Um, but when they are kind of practicing that Ohio State defense, there's spots in between the zone. I would hope for Michigan State to score between 13 and 17 points at the minimum. Anything more than that is going to be a task. But I think for a program like Michigan State, that should be the expectation, regardless of defensive performance against whatever competition may be prior to that. So you look, if you're Jay Johnson, you really want to get Caden Hauser in rhythm, easy throws, trying to just get Malik Carr maybe sitting in the apex zone of the zone. That was where he was able to make a lot of hay before he got hurt against Iowa, just kind of sitting down in that little turkey hole between a linebacker and a safety and just allowing an easy sight read rhythm throw. Um, Keaton Hauser looked pretty good against Rutgers. I thought, all things considered, first start on the road, bad weather. I have some concerns about his arm strength, and if he floats an out route against Will Johnson the way that he did against Rutgers a couple times, that's getting taken back. So you can't do that. You got to protect your quarterback. You got to stand up to the pass rush, and I think that Michigan State's offensive line is going to be able to do that. They're a pretty good pass protecting unit, but I have serious doubts about the efficacy of their ground game. And if a team doesn't have to respect you on the ground and they can tee off against your pass, that's an issue. So I could see Michigan State putting up a pretty game fight on defense, but it's consistently scoring points where I have serious questions about their ability to string together drives on a consistent basis.
I I guess how do you think, since you mentioned Hauser and you kind of have doubts
Mhm.
about him, do you have a specific prediction on how you think Hauser will perform in this his second start kind of at home, but now against a big rival? What do you
I
think?
mean, I don't necessarily have doubts about him as an overall quarterback or player. I just more specifically his arm strength. I think he's a young quarterback. He's very talented. There's no question about that. I think will be a good player by the time it's said and done. But I would not be surprised to see him throw probably a pretty bad interception just because he doesn't know what he's looking at. And there's not necessarily a ton of shame in that because the same cornerbacks that got barbecued by Ricky White and among others in 2020 were the same cornerbacks that beat Ohio State in 2021. They didn't become better players; they got put in a better scheme. And in back to back years, what was able to keep C.J. Stroud and those great Ohio State receivers contained was in 2021, yes, extremely good edge play from Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, but also the ability to confuse CJ Stroud. And if a guy who is pretty much maybe not a shoe in, but in the front at this time of this taping, the front runner for Rookie of the Year, if he doesn't know what he's looking at, a redshirt freshman making his second start probably isn't either. So he might plant a couple balls into linebackers' chests. That's going to happen. It's part of what you get with a young quarterback. Um, if I was an offensive coordinator, like I said, just easy completions. Try to Michigan State showed a lot of running back action into the flats in the spring as far as using Nathan Carter, particularly as a receiver, which is something he flashed at UConn. I would look to do that again. Just easy completions. Try to get free yards on the outside underneath, and if you have to push the middle of the field, do it very strategically, because if you throw to the middle of the field and you're off against this defense, it's going to get picked off because they can switch from a cover four to a cover three, and then you're in all sorts of trouble if that's happening post snap and you don't realize it. So I would imagine you'll probably see a pretty conservative game plan designed to take the air out of the ball, and I don't think that that's a bad move at all. Because if you're irresponsible with the ball against this team, it will avalanche on you pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else to add about Michigan's defense before we kind of just go game predictions in general?
No, I think that just about covers it. They have a lot of depth. Their secondary has been dinged up, so they're not completely healthy. So you do see sometimes a seam is left open, or there's not a great communication. And I would look for Michigan State to take advantage of that at least once.
Okay. All right. So I guess just give me your overall prediction on how you think the game will go. And my big question, which we've kind of touched on a little, but maybe to summarize, are there areas that Michigan State can find matchup advantages during this game?
Certainly. Yeah. I think unlike last year when you have a guy like Keon Coleman, who's like, if he's one on one, going to be very difficult to cover him. Now, after he scored Michigan State's lone touchdown last year, Michigan just rotated a safety over, and because Jalen Naylor was, or not Jalen Naylor, Jaden Reed was effectively erased by then a true freshman Will Johnson, there wasn't an answer there, right? So you're not necessarily going to have a personnel mismatch like you did at that point in time. You're going to have to scheme them up. I have not seen a great proclivity from Jay Johnson to be able to do that on a consistent basis. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. But it does mean that he would certainly be the first this year to do it on the offensive side of the ball. For Michigan State to stay competitive in this game into the fourth quarter, they're going to need to force turnovers, whether that be on the defensive side of the ball, or I guess getting a plus play off of special teams. You need high variance things to happen for Michigan State to stay in contact this game, or else Michigan's just kind of going to swallow you up.
And I think that's maybe what happened a little bit because they had a couple slow starts. I watched
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
briefly Maryland and I think Indiana. Both of those teams scored first, if I remember right, against Michigan, and then they couldn't keep up, and Michigan absolutely swallowed them at the end. Um, Talk maybe a little bit about those slow starts that you've seen, and if you think that will carry over to
Mm-hmm.
their matchup against Michigan State.
Yeah, so I think it was Bowling Green in Indiana. And uh, Bowling Green, McCarthy came in and threw a couple picks in ways that were attributable to both taking an unnecessary risk and when he miscommunicated with a wide receiver, and then somebody running the wrong route. And I don't know if that's replicable. However, against Indiana, the reason for the slow start was because Indiana absolutely blitzed the tar out of JJ McCarthy and sacked him twice, and that killed two drives and allowed Indiana to strike first on a trick play. So that could be something. I have not seen a lot of exotic blitzes from Michigan State's defense. Tom Allen is many things, and I don't necessarily know if a good football coach is one of them. But he is, I think, a sound defensive coordinator and is really good at drawing up blitzes. If you have a few blitz packages that you haven't used yet, this would be the time to deploy them, or else you're going to get carved. So if you can get after the quarterback, I think you could. That is a reason for a slow start that is scalable that Michigan State could emulate if they elect to use their personnel in a way that is conducive to that.
Yeah, and that's kind of was my what my question was. If those slow starts were just kind of one and done things that those teams
Hmm.
did, or if there was something that Michigan State could emulate. So that answered my question perfectly. Who do you think will come away with the win at the end of this game?
I think Michigan. I would not be surprised to see. I mean, it's going to be a night game. One would imagine a fairly lubricated crowd. Possible, specialty uniforms. That's always fun.
Mm-hmm.
I would expect to see it close for a quarter. If Michigan goes up 21-3 or something like that, I mean, you might be looking at a 50 burger because then there's no looking back. But I would expect something maybe a little bit more like last year, kind of a slow burn that slowly kind of snowballs, but perhaps it gets out of hand a little bit earlier than last year. But I do really struggle to see a scenario in which Michigan State wins this game. I think if you look back on it, the narrative of you need to throw the records out, I think is largely overplayed. If you look at kind of taking the preseason bias towards Michigan that existed through a lot of the Rich Rod Hoke years in particular out of it, and just look at who the better team was. Most years, except for really 2021, and those teams were fairly evenly matched. And 2001, you look at the last 20 or so years, the better team wins this game. And I think to suggest otherwise is to um, downplay what some of those really good Mark D'Antonio teams accomplished because they won because they were the better team, better constructed, better execution, better scheme top to bottom. And I think the better team wins, and I think in this game the better team's Michigan.
Season outlook overall for Michigan. Any predictions there going forward? for them.
I mean, it'll come down to what they do against Penn State and Ohio State, and I don't think that's a huge secret. The way they play football, I'm not overly threatened by like a Maryland. I think
Right.
the October Maryland has firmly arrived with them losing to Illinois, um, and additionally they have Josh Gaddis coordinating their offense, on whom I have a number of opinions, none of them good. And the back half of the schedule, I would be shocked to see Purdue stay in contact with them. And it's just going to come down to Penn State and Ohio State. And then if they get in the playoff, is this the year that they can do something on a national level? That's more difficult to prognosticate, but I would say that this is probably the best chance that they've had in quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah. Things are pointing in that direction. I would never say that out loud, but you're the guest, so you can say that. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you want to say about this matchup on Saturday before we close out our episode here?
No, I mean it looks like the rain will stop in the mid morning. Should be a fun day of tailgating. I think watching Penn State, Ohio State, from the Michigan perspective will be very interesting to kind of see what those teams look like, because we have the only data point we really have about a good on good matchup is Ohio State putting away, but barely, a fairly pedestrian Notre Dame team. So it'll be interesting. I mean, championships are won, when the sky is gray and the leaves are brown, and we'll see what happens.
All right, so Michigan State takes on Michigan at home, 7:30 on Saturday. This episode will go before then to kind of give you all the information that you need to know before the game. This episode will be on YouTube, and if you're looking for just the audio version, anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. Like I said, there'll be Chase's kind of preview article linked in the description of the episode here if you want to read more. And we will be back for a recap episode following the game on Saturday with the usual group. Thanks so much for joining, Chase. It was great to have you on. And thanks so much for listening. Bye.
Outstanding. Thank you.